Welcome to the Lawyer Life Podcast, where the personal, professional, and political intersect. Each week, we cover a topic to help ourselves and other lawyers navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. On today's episode, we discuss gender. We're asking ourselves, how can we better come to understand each other's experiences? I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hello, Darlene.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you, the happiest of Fridays on this cold January month. Get out of town with this weather. Just get out of town, weather.
At least when there's snow, it's not as bad. Then it's there's a winter wonderland going on.
It's hazardous.
That's true. Icy.
And I have to put little shoes on my dog's feet, which, come on. You don't want to start a morning putting boots on a dog.
How does she feel about those boots?
She's tolerant. They're not good. If anybody has good dog boots, at Mike on Twitter, let me know. One will always fall off on the walk, and so inevitably, I am just watching her pause for the one to fall off, so we don't lose it forever. Because it's 4, and they're not, they're permanent-ish. Well, they're reusable. So. Anyway, I'm
Rosie,
done.
The challenges that she has.
She's got really bad breath too. We're taking her to the vet next week. I'll report back on that. I brushed her teeth last night. It didn't work. So it's bad. You could smell it in the other room.
My God, yeah. Rosie. Terrible. She can't be sitting near the podcast if that's the situation.
She's downstairs.
Is she listening right now?
No, I wouldn't be able to concentrate if she was anywhere near me.
Okay.
That's the dog. Anywho, so we're talking gender today. Nothing that I've spoken about Rosie so far relates to that. But anyway, so the Gillette thing has come out. Everybody has seen that. And obviously that has caused, I don't think it's actually that controversial. I think there are just some dum-dums who, have posted a picture on Twitter that went viral. I think that generally a lot of folks can get behind the message from Gillette, which is, hey, men, let's be the best we can be. Which I think is a really great message. But then flowing from that, Darlene, you and I have seen some great articles of late about the female experience in the legal industry. So that's what kind of drove us to talk about this today, correct?
Yeah, and when we read the articles, I think that in the lens of this podcast, what we're always trying to do is to navigate our days with a little less stress, right? And I think that these gender issues for everyone who's dealing with these issues, they're stressful. They add stress. They reduce productivity. They cause distraction. They aren't good for clients, right? All of this stuff. Yeah. So there have been a few articles this week in addition to the Gillette ad, which I think now it was a couple weeks back. And I think if we talk about a few of them with the goal of trying to figure out, okay, how do we better understand what the experience of other people is? And I think that for women too, it's useful to know that men, there are easier ways for them to get entry into this topic, right? Like they can kind of think through how to be helpful, how to be an ally, as opposed to it becoming sort of entrenched positions about who's right and who's wrong or anything like that.
Totally agree. And so we'll touch on, I think, a few articles today. And so just to name them off the top, we'll put them in the show notes too. But there's a great article from a site called dawn.com called What Do Women Lawyers Expect from Their Male Colleagues Anyway? Very helpful FAQ format especially for male lawyers to take a look at to see, the answer to that question. What do women lawyers expect from their male counterparts? There's another great article actually written by a lawyer from Learners, Jacob R.W. Damstra. And he attended the Learners LLP Women's Symposium and had some great takeaways from that I'd like to touch on. And then as well, just a shout out to a litigator at Lax O'Sullivan, Brianna Needham on Twitter at Brianna, BREANNA _Needham, NEEDHAM. She if you want to get into this stuff, and she's so generously spending a lot of her time posting articles like this, she's doing the good work. Empathy. Darlene, what do you think about that?
Are you going to define
How does this come into that?
Well, I'm wondering if you're going to define empathy for us.
Well, okay.
Or do you want me to?
Well, do you want to do it? I would love for you to do it, Darlene. I would love for you to impart your wisdom on this.
Well, My wisdom slash Google's says,
One and the same now for everybody.
yes,
Yeah.
my information anyway, as we've discussed before. Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of
Mm-hmm.
reference. That's the best. I think the key piece, and the ability to put yourself in someone else's
That's
shoes.
it.
So I think that, I have similarly found it useful to see these articles and think about it from the other perspective. Like, I'm kind of used to walking into a room and being one of the only women, or like that's just kind of something I'm very used to doing, and I have a way of dealing with that. But conversely, it was interesting to think about walking into rooms that are often only, like, from the male perspective, like only men
Yeah.
or just a few women. Like, it was interesting for me to think about that, just as a very simple
Yeah.
example.
And I think so. And I think we're bringing together, the topic of gender with empathy, because ultimately, as we'll get to, hopefully, that's what this all comes down to, is really to actually understand, to put ourselves in the shoes of the gender that we are not, that we don't experience being. We need to develop empathy, and the way you do that, at least in what we'll walk through today, is by gathering the information about the gender you are not, and then building a sort of architecture of experience in your brain that you can start to channel experiences through. And then perhaps if you have enough information, and it's the right information, and it's rich enough, you can actually get to a point where you might be able to see something from another person's perspective, another gender's perspective, and then that can channel action that could help to solve the problem. I love the example, Darlene, that you brought up about, being the only woman in a room, because one of my clients is a workplace of like 80% women. I often have been the only man in a room. And so on its face, it might be like, oh, well, I understand what that feels like, so it must be the same. It is not the same, because I am still a man in that room in the context of the world we live in today. And that comes along with privilege. And so actually what I need to do is to understand what the experience, the tangible, real experience of what it's like to be the sole woman in a room when we're all lawyers working together. And then only then can I really start to, come to empathize. And that's why these articles are so helpful, I find.
Well, one of the other things too is that it's not just about the space you're occupying in the room or whatever. It's about that there are often assumptions about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that one of the things that would be helpful, and if I was listening to you kind of lay out the idea of building an architecture. I mean, part of my own architecture that I try to always be focused on is just like to treat other people how I would want to be treated. And I think that is like a baseline. And then part of understanding that is to like remove assumptions. So, like, assuming how I want to be treated is, I guess, a piece of that, right? Like, I'm in just already in this conversation. I'm kind of like, well, maybe other people don't want to be treated like how I want to be
Yeah.
treated, you know. So this is why it's important to say. I mean, that's just how I was brought up. Is like, you don't do something to somebody else that you wouldn't want done to you. Um, so I wouldn't, for example, ask a female lawyer that I saw at court if she was an assistant or a lawyer. I
Right.
would not do that. Just, it would not be something I would do, whether I was a man or a woman. So that's something that I think, that's an assumption that kind of comes in when people are in the space, right? It's like, you're not just a woman where there are only men. There are also all these assumptions over and above what that might mean about you. Like, do you know what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Are you the lead counsel? Are you an assistant? That kind of thing. So I don't know what your take on that is. Like, what do you think the assumptions that are made about you are when you're the only man in that
I
room?
don't. Well, I think I benefit from so many positive assumptions that come along with the fact that I am a privileged male. So there's even, I was doing some reading earlier this week that scientific studies bear out that deeper voices garner a more positive impression from people, and that they find a deeper voice to be more based in leadership and more credible and so on. I have a deep voice, so being in a room full of women, I have that privilege. And that's just a small example on top of all the background of like how I probably was more helped by others getting to that room, and having the experiences I did before that. Like, there's so much there that The what excites me about this topic and the idea of building this architecture for empathy means that actually like you start to truly see what's actually occurring for all folks in a room. And so the article by Jacob Damstra at Learners kind of gets to this. So he goes to this, the all women symposium. So and there's a speaker named Danielle Robitaille, who's I think is a criminal lawyer, and his quote in the article that he writes is that the keynote was insightful and thought provoking in so many ways. She raised issues which, as a man, I had not considered. These include, but are not limited to, which I love in an article. Just be a lawyer, bud. Go for it. These include, but are not
that.
limited to. I love it. And the list is as follows. Oh, Mike's being a lawyer too. As follows. So it includes that women traditionally under promote their talents, efforts, and accomplishments. Women are more likely to credit their male colleagues for wins and successes. Women are more often voluntold and more likely to volunteer for non-promotable tasks and projects. Women receive non-specific, unhelpful feedback on their work, which limits their ability to grow and improve far more than their colleagues who are fathers. Mothers are encouraged to focus on balancing and prioritizing family and adopt less than full-time working arrangements after having children. So long list there that Jacob put forward. But as he acknowledges, these are issues that he had not considered. So in the framework of treat others how you'd like to be treated, Jacob, perhaps, I don't want to speak for him, or at least like a person, a male who had not been exposed to these issues when thinking about how he'd like to be treated is only thinking about his experience. And now as we start to focus on these things and start to understand what it really means to be told to prioritize your family over your career, or not getting specific feedback, when we start to really dial into like what the effects of those things are, you can start to see the imbalance, and you can start to see how it's not just about how I want to be treated. It's actually about adapting your behavior to ensure that you're not missing the things that most people miss when they treat women this way.
Well, and men don't get a lot of. I still think men are viewed with a bit of suspicion when they want to devote time to family in an appropriate
Yeah.
way. I think that's something that they may not understand, that some women might feel like they don't want to have the conversation, that they should be always making sacrifices for family. But similarly, women would like to have men be more supported in making those choices, because that would in turn allow women to make more flexible choices. Like, these issues are not unconnected, right? Like, the reason that a lot of women do make the choice to stay home is because it's so much more socially acceptable. And there's a biological imperative, of some level at the beginning anyway. And then it just kind of sticks. Sometimes women stay home for a year, and then they've stayed home for a year, and the behavior is kind of imprinted, the roles are imprinted. So I think that what I speak to friends about and see different women experiencing is, what we want is for everyone to have the flexibility to figure out what the right situation for their family is, without any gendered kind of expectations.
Absolutely. And that is, such a great solution to that sort of problem, which if you are, you have, I think, such a wonderful advantage of being a woman that's leading inter alia, and you get it, right? Like, you've had firsthand experience with that. Whereas if you're a man who hasn't had experience in that running a firm, you're far less likely to get to that point of wanting to have such a flexible arrangement, because you don't have that architecture to empathize with your employees that are taking on primary childcare obligations.
Well, the other thing too to think about, and this is something that I believe, and I don't really hear it talked about a lot, but when I support the men on my team who want to be there for paternity leave, or want to have flexible times in their schedule so they can be responsible for different obligations in the home, I'm supporting their wives with my business model. Like, it's another form of supporting women, right? Like, it's not all about making the woman in your workforce feel supported. It's about supporting like the reality of life, which is that there are often, mixed gender couples that are trying to navigate these what are generally just difficult. Like it's very hard in those first few years with kids to figure out what
Yeah.
the split is and to have these sort of gendered expectations not only applied but incorporated into business models and things like, like the expectation is there are these layers of expectation that I try to be aware of first, like the expectation, oh, Mike's not at his desk at 5 o'clock. That means he's not serious about his work. Well, no, it may mean that he's picking up his child at daycare and he'll
Hmm.
email me at 6. You know, that's okay. It doesn't, that doesn't go to performance. And I think that sometimes that is going to performance, like there's sort of, that's just an assumption. It's not a truth. It's just sort of a, I don't know, is it a habit? Is it a habit of looking at people and making some conclusion about their seriousness about work because of their,
Well, it's like an old legacy structure, right?
right?
Like it used to be that the only way you could do work was being present in the place. And obviously that's no longer the case, but we still have that.
Right. It's like a hangover. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Yeah. And the funny thing is about all this, if there's a group of people who should be well positioned to solve these complicated issues by gathering all context and information and coming to a good solution, it should be our profession. I mean, the we are taught in law school and early in our careers, when you have a client come in and you sit across, there's a format to a client interview and to gathering information, and it's not, you just don't take the information on its face and go and run with it. You dig deep and you ask questions and you come to get your mind around a whole issue. And that's what is required here, I think. And that's what empathy needs, is that, you know, folks are open to learning all the information that they need about a person's experience. We don't react defensively. We don't speak over other people. We don't reject their experience outright. It's about taking in information and then building, in this case, architecture to truly empathize. It requires learning detailed facts and asking questions and understanding nuance. And that's what we're good at, right?
Yeah, and I think it's sort of taking each situation on its own facts. So that's what kind of what
Mm-hmm.
you're saying. It's like treating every lawyer like the client who walks in the door. Like I think there are baselines, right? Like the equal availability of mat leave and paternity leave, or some idea of, having a discussion about family leave right top of the career, right at the beginning, assuming it's going to happen. There are ways of leveling the playing field, making sure that these issues aren't so contentious or that one gender doesn't bear them disproportionately. That's all very important. But then on top of that, I think that there needs to still be room to treat people as individuals, because I know some women that I know, they don't really embrace that mantle of motherhood as much as other women do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
It's another form of assumption and discrimination to say, oh, well, you're a woman, so you must be very motherly. That's not always true. There
Mm-hmm.
are many men that I have met that are, extremely committed dads, and, they need to be dealt with on those facts. Like the business has to accommodate that. Or, I was thinking about promotions for women. Just reading one of the other articles that we read was about female general counsels and how they select their external
Yeah.
counsel and some of the treatment that they receive. And it just made me realize that, female general counsels might have different issues to be addressed within the organization. And the first step is us understanding what they're going through and asking them, and finding out what, like, not assuming that just because something has always been this way that they are experiencing it the same way. They might not be. So I don't know. What was your big takeaway?
First of all, having been a general counsel before, that is a male, I didn't experience a lot of what the experiences were described in this article, which are like, things like email, dear sirs, or gentleman and woman, and, so some crappy things like that. And then some also, being spoken over, being, sometimes male outside counsel only dealing with the male GC and not the female legal counsel because they just, make an assumption that that person's not qualified. Making assumptions about the female GC or in-house counsel not understanding issues of conflict of interest, like these sort of issues. I normally, I would say, get great service from outside counsel and have in the past, and never experienced somebody who I'm paying money to uh, treat me as lesser. I mean, I haven't encountered that all that often. Um, and I think what this goes to is not only on the like be a good human side, but also, I guess if that doesn't motivate you enough, if you're a male outside counsel and you're dealing with GCs and in-house counsel, it's better for your business to be able to empathize with these people. And if you truly do that, then you will avoid issues like writing "Dear Sirs," even if it's not malicious, because you can again actually root yourself in what that experience might feel like for the person who receives that email. And I think once you root yourself in that and maybe get that perspective, you're more prone to avoid that behavior.
It's offensive to get a Dear Sirs letter, but it's also, I remember when someone told me that, I was like, well, I don't want to write Dear Sirs. So like, what do I write? And
What?
they were like, Mesdames. And I'm like, what? That can't be right. Is that a word?
Hello, all. What's going on here? Like, what? How is this hard?
Dear you.
You're about to send a complex legal opinion and you can't figure out just to say hello at the top of it? What's happening? Who are these people?
Yeah, I think that needs to go. When I read that article, I tried to think of whether I'd had any sort of experiences like that. I always had the good fortune to be dealing with really kind of open minded counsel. And when we had an external law firm working with us, I remember being very struck on the positive side at how much energy they invested in networking with
Right.
female in house counsel and treating them differently. Like I wasn't asked to go golfing. I was, there was a different sort of set of events that we were invited
Mm-hmm.
to and thoughtful, and I thought that was very good business by the external firms that we were working with. And obviously a recognition on their part that the female in-house counsel are their clients and a good portion of them and an increasing portion. So I've always thought it was pretty forward thinking. I mean, that was a, maybe 8 years ago that I started noticing that firms were treating female general counsel differently in a positive way. But yeah, I think that the idea of some of the behaviors described in that article, I've definitely seen and heard about. So, very good article. We'll link to that one in the show notes as well.
I would recommend, especially for our male listeners, to give these a read. They're not they're fairly quick reads. They're very practical. I know for me, they give very detailed experiences that if you really channel, I think that it can drive great and natural change in behavior. Like, for example, understanding and really reading about what it feels like to be spoken over often in meetings as a woman can drive you as a man to ensure that women have space to express themselves in those settings. Or understanding that, again, that when like women get unspecific feedback, if you're in a position where you have associates or you're mentoring somebody, you're an articling principal to a woman, then that can drive you to give more direct and productive feedback to help that person's career path. Like, these things can only assist you, I think, make a better situation for the people you're working with, but yourself as well.
Yes, and then the other thing I was going to say is the productivity. Back to that idea of like assuming. So one thing that I've definitely experienced, and I've experienced it as a person doing sort of more innovative things, but also I think there's a gendered element to it. So I'm just going to raise it as a point to ponder. I do think that we have to consider, what goes into our assumptions about the person that we're
Mm-hmm.
about to start a conversation with or a negotiation or whatever. Like, do we assume they know what they're doing or do we assume they don't? And if we don't, why not? Is it
Mm-hmm.
gendered? Is it age based? Is it for any other reason unconnected to legal skill? I think it's good just to be aware of those assumptions because I do feel that sometimes when you are kind of going into a situation, I have definitely experienced that I kind of have to prove that I know what I'm talking about, as opposed to that just being an assumption, right? And I think that that's a form of privilege, and one that we can, by becoming aware of it, just kind of, decide if it's based on facts or assumptions, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Totally. And not only is that the right thing to do, but it will probably position you better in your job as well, practically speaking, because if you underestimate somebody, it's likely that they're actually way better than you think, and then you're ill-positioned in the negotiation or whatever you're up to.
Back to assessing the facts, getting the right information out in the interview.
Yeah.
There's a very good blog post on that too, which we will link as well, which is by Erin Cowling, and it's about sort of the productivity cost of having to be distracted by this constant need to be explaining that you know what you're doing and then jumping into it. Very good post. And I definitely, I think a lot of people will relate to it, maybe on both sides, right? Like, I think it's sort of, we've probably all done it, maybe to a junior lawyer or something. It's not just a gendered issue, but anyway, it's a good one.
Okay. Well, this has been lovely. I enjoyed this conversation. I think we'll continue it.
I think so too. I think this is, we always try to just kind of introduce topics that are maybe, I don't know, one of my frustrations is sometimes these topics just kind of start with an articulation of the problem, and then we don't really talk about the solutions, but I think they're very solvable. I really do. I think just understanding a little bit more about everyone else's feelings in the situation and not making assumptions is step one. And then, the second step is, not assuming that everything you've always done is right because you've always done it. Like being open to listening and coming up with a different approach is good. And I do see positive moves in our profession all the time on that front. I really do. And, some of this stuff, like, you don't even notice how much the layering of social conditioning goes into it. And I'll leave with a funny non-law example that I don't know if other people will appreciate, but I sure thought it was funny. I'm reading a book to my son, and it is a book about Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman.
Where is she? That's my Batman.
Yes, Batman and Superman boys. Anyway, the interesting thing is we read the whole book, and I think nothing of it. I'm familiar with these three superheroes, have been since I was a child. And my 4-year-old son, he says, I have one question at the end of the book where there's a picture of the three of them standing together. And he says, how come Wonder Woman's not wearing any clothes?
Great question.
And I'm like, that is a truly excellent question, because everything about the book leads me to believe it's cold outside. And this kid has been taught that, when you go outside, you would maybe be like Superman, have a cape, a full outfit,
Be layered in Kevlar like Batman. Yeah.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's Wonder Woman like flying around in the atmosphere with no clothes on. And I just thought, yeah, he hasn't learned yet that there is sort of a distinction on that point. I'm not going to comment on it further. I just thought it was interesting that it's kind of a gendered point. Like, we're sort of used to seeing women in non-warm clothes, for lack of a better word. And he doesn't know about that yet. He's just too little. So that was one example, and I thought a funny one leading up to the gender podcast. But to be continued on this conversation.
Well, it seems like he was being empathetic of like, I have been cold before. She looks cold. How could she not be cold? Looks freezing.
Neither he nor his sister is allowed to go outside wearing only a bodysuit. So he thinks this is a very odd thing. And, from his perspective, not really gendered, purely related to the Superman and Batman costumes. But anyway, there are so many layers to this stuff. So I think we will come up with a whole bunch of different angles. We will always try to bring in different perspectives and, just try to improve this one podcast at a time.
One podcast at a time. Okay, we'll go to a break and can be back with our goods. The Lawyer Life podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law, experienced legal counsel when and where you need us. To learn more about Inter Alia, visit the website That's spelled INTERALIA-law.com. Thank you. And we are back with our goods. Goods are things we want to support and promote. Darlene,
why don't you go first? You're always, yeah, you go first. Since you raised the Marie Kondo, I have been seeing her everywhere.
Thrift stores are seeing a drastic increase in donations this year compared to last, and they think it's because of the show.
Wow, with people decluttering.
Yep. The key is to not reclutter people,
Yes.
because then it's just more consumerism and waste. Anyway, I have a good that's music related. Wonderful Canadian band, a band I love called Pop, is about to release a new album, and I think a wonderful promotional bit, but also just fun for their fans. So they haven't released the full album yet, but on Twitter they released the structure of one of their songs that's unreleased, so no one's heard it. And it's basically the chords and the lyrics and the structure of the song. And they're encouraging all the fans to record a version themselves and send it to the band. And then they're going to post them and see. And it'll be so. I'm really excited to see how different all the songs are, even though they're all based in the same foundation. So I thought it was super neat. And they're a great band to support. Very good.
Okay, that's a good one. I feel like there's so many goods. This weekend, I was reading a popular fiction book. I'm ashamed to say that I sort of read it very, very quickly. Maybe should have not been staying up late reading a book. But anyway, it's the latest one in the Cormoran Strike series. Do you know this series? It's Robert Galbraith, which is actually J.K. Rowling. It's her book series for adults. And she had originally written it under a pseudonym. And if anyone hasn't read it, I think it's very good, especially if you were a fan of Harry Potter.
Harry Potter? Harry?
Who's not a fan, really, of that? With the Robert Galbraith series, she was trying to get out there and not have her name attached to it and see if she could be successful. And there's a whole backstory to that.
She was outed, right?
Yeah, people very quickly figured out that it was her. There was a leak or something. But it's good that it's her. It's nice to read it in that lens because it's so different from Harry Potter. But a lot of the stuff like plot complexity and a very, very long plot arc over a bunch of different books is all in there. So I love a good mystery. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. I'm trying not to read the news and get outraged because it's not good for my Zen demeanor. Yeah. So I chose to read popular fiction, and I highly recommend it.
On that note, just about pleasant stuff that is nice right now. Schitt's Creek is getting huge play. I know it's so Canadian to bring it up only when the US starts to pay attention. But nominated for Critics' Choice Award, great Canadian production. And I have friends that work on that show. Back in my MTV days, I was, 2 desks away from Dan Levy. So it's so neat to see how well he's doing and how well the show is doing. And that is an ultimate, pleasant, fun escape as well. So highly recommend.
We all need that.
We do.
I think it's there's so much pressure to be constantly working, as we discussed on last week's episode in the millennial burnout. And I think all lawyers relate to this pressure, constantly working. And as an entrepreneur, it's very hard to turn it off because you could literally always be doing more to improve your business. But I think that in that downtime, there's just power in, doing something for yourself every now and again. And literally,
go watch a nice show.
Yeah, literally no one
Harry
from me reading Harry Potter for adults. But I had a good time. It was a nice break.
Nice. Okay. Well, thanks for the chat. I guess we will talk soon. That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.